Recording now, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, thanks everybody for being on Zoom. I know it's a hopefully one-time thing this time around. We'll see how things go. This morning, I have pretty kind of a straightforward lesson that is maybe more for my benefit than anything else. I'm sure everybody's been in this position before. As is kind of a universal thing. But just with everything we've had going on, it's been I think for everybody, it's been a hard year. And we kind of joke about 2020 being very difficult and such. It's been stressful for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And not necessarily all in bad ways. The stress, I think some of the stress that we've seen are some good things, at least from my perspective and from our family. You know, the year started out with the girls turning 2, and that's great. And there's been a lot of great things about that age. But right as they turned 2, they started not sleeping well again. They had a little bit of a sleep regression, and then the quarantine stuff happened back in March, and we threw our schedules off, and they kept not sleeping well. And then as they might have started hitting a routine again, Ezra was born, which again, not a bad thing. We greatly enjoy Ezra being here, but having a new baby provides some stress and provides less sleep, right? He was waking up quite a bit at the very beginning. He's sleeping pretty well now, but it again threw the girls off of their schedule. And so sleep has been kind of hit and miss for the last few months. 3 weeks after Ezra was born, Skylar broke her arm. And then she started having night terrors and panic attacks with that. So we had to navigate toddler anxiety. And then as she healed a month later, Riley had to have her appendix out and spent a week in the hospital. And then spent a week at home, and then got a secondary infection, and then went back to the hospital for another few days. And during all of this process, as we mentioned a couple weeks ago at church during the announcements, when we're trying to buy a house, again, a good thing, but a lot of stress goes into that. And me and Morgan have looked at each other a couple of times lately and just said, we need a break. You know, we're tired. And I know a lot of people have had a lot of things worse than we have. And all right, baby, go away. Yeah, that's me. Please go sit with Grandma Lynn. Can you keep her over there? A lot of people have had it a lot worse than we have. I'm not saying all of this to complain about anything, but just to point out kind of the universal nature of being tired and being at the end of your rope and feeling like you can't do it anymore. You can't go anymore. You need help. You need something. You need a break. And when I was taking Riley to the hospital a couple weeks ago now, when we were going back for our second visit when she got that infection, you know, I was just thinking, I can't. It's too much. It's tiring. And then a friend of mine mentioned something recently to me, or not specifically to me, but I saw that he was talking about the state of the world, right? And it's not just about my life personally, but we're all going through things, right? Again, this year's been weird, and right now we're in the middle of a crazy political battle, and Christians are trying to navigate that. How do we best fit into this political paradigm, and how much do we put ourselves into it or not, and where do we follow certain people and certain things, and how do we navigate that? And we look at the virus that's been going on, and we see the evil that's happened in the world over the past, you know, not just this year, but throughout time, and it just kind of seems to be getting worse. And you just kind of take a breath, and you say, when's it going to end? What is the problem? And my friend, you know, kind of said, it's easy to think, where is God in all of this? When all of this bad stuff happens, when all of this stressful stuff happens, when all of these things happen that just wear you out, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Where is God during all of that? You know, how can we get through this on our own? Because I think if we look at what the Bible says, we can't do it on our own. And I think not just the Bible tells us that, but our bodies tell us that. Romans chapter 8 talks about how we groan for the next life, how our bodies are looking for something better. Romans chapter 8, starting in verse 18, he says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation eagerly waits with anticipation for God's sons to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will also be set free from the bondage of corruption into the glorious freedom of God's children. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together with labor pains until now. And not only that, but we ourselves who have the Spirit as the first fruits, we also groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. Now in this hope we are saved. Yet hope that is seen is not hope, because who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with patience." In Romans chapter 8 is a great chapter about hope. But kind of the emphasis of that verse is, while we're waiting for something better, life hurts. We hurt as we grow older. Our bodies hurt. We get exhausted. We get worn out, and the world around us hurts. And he says some very interesting things about creation longing for redemption as well. It's a universal thing that life can hurt, and life can be trying, and life can be exhausting. And so I want to look at 4 passages this morning to answer the question, where is God during all of this? Where is God when we're hurting? Where is God when we're tired? Where is God when we are at the end of our ropes and we just need help? I want to look at 4 different passages pretty quickly this morning. Like I said, it's going to be a little straightforward. But turn with me first to 2 Corinthians chapter 1. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, as we look at the life of Paul, we see a man who, after his conversion, dedicates himself to a life in the gospel, who dedicates himself to good, and who does a lot of great things. And it can be very easy to say, I want to be like Paul. I want to do the great things that Paul did. I want to teach people the way Paul taught. But Paul also carried with him a burden that came with living this life that he led. And before we look at chapter 1, just to look at chapter 11, where of 2 Corinthians, where he lists off all the things that had happened to him as an apostle. He says in verse 23 that he had many more imprisonments, worse beatings, near death many times. 5 times he received 39 lashes from Jews. 3 times I was beaten with rods by the Romans. Once I was stoned by my enemies. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I have spent a night and a day in the open sea. On frequent journeys I faced dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my own people, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in open country, dangers on the sea, and dangers among false brothers, labor and hardship, many sleepless nights, hunger and thirst, often without food, cold, and lack of clothing. Not to mention other things, there is the daily pressure on me, my care for all the churches. Paul lived a stressful life. He has the care for the churches on his mind. He is obsessed with the welfare of those who he loves. He mentions in almost every letter that he writes, I pray daily for you. Paul's prayer life must have been amazing, that he mentions all of these people, all of these churches by name on a daily basis, he says. And that is consuming his thoughts. And then on top of this, all of these things are happening to him. All of these hardships are happening to him. And then in chapter 1, if you go back to the beginning of the book, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, he says in verse 8, for we don't want you to be unaware, brothers, of our affliction that took place in Asia. We were completely overwhelmed beyond our strength, so that we even despaired of life. Indeed, we personally had a death sentence within ourselves, so that we would not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a terrible death, and he will deliver us. We have put our hope in him that he will deliver us again, while you join in helping us by your prayers. Then many will give thanks on our behalf for the gift that came to us through the prayers of many. Of all of these things that Paul has mentioned, of all these bad things that have happened, he says there was this one instance in Asia, and it was the worst. It was a situation that was so bad that we despaired of life. We didn't know how we were going to go on. He says we were overwhelmed beyond our strength, beyond our ability to bear it. Paul says this is not us. We were at the end of our rope. We were past the end of our rope. We couldn't do it anymore. It wasn't us anymore. It was something that we couldn't handle. And where is God during that? Well, he's the strength that got them through that. Right? He was overwhelmed beyond his strength. If he's beyond his own strength, then there's some other strength that's carrying him through that, or else he would have died. God was that strength, and he says that they trusted in God as a God of resurrection, as a God who delivers them from terrible death, that he had delivered them and that he would deliver them again. Paul trusted in God, and he asks the question, where is God? He's there to offer deliverance. He is there as a resurrector of the dead. Going back to the beginning of the Old Testament, in Exodus chapter 2, we see the state of the Hebrew people. We see the state of the Hebrew people in Egyptian slavery. If you look back at chapter 1, it starts out saying that there was a king that rose that did not know Joseph. And this man did not know God either. Verse 8 of chapter 1 says, a new king who had not known Joseph came to power in Egypt, and he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are more numerous and powerful than we are. Let us deal shrewdly with them. Otherwise, they will multiply further. And if war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and leave our country. So the Egyptians assigned taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. It was not good. They were enslaved, harshly enslaved. Pharaoh required all midwives to kill the newborn boys. It was a state of oppression. And as you get to Exodus chapter 2 and verse 23, and you're looking at the badness of Egypt throughout chapters 1 and 2, he says in verse 23, after a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned because of their difficult labor, and they cried out, and their cry for help ascended to God because of the difficult labor. So God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the Israelites and he took notice. The Israelites don't know that, though. They're crying out because of their extreme pain, because of the anguish of slavery and oppression. But then in chapter 3, we see God acting on this. In chapter 3, he approaches Moses in the burning bush. In verse 7, he says, "Then Jehovah said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt and have heard them crying out because of their oppressors. And I know about their sufferings. I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to bring them from a land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the territory of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. The Israelites' cry for help has come to me, and I have also seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore go. I am sending you to Pharaoh so that you may lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." The Israelites are in pain. They are in extreme anguish. They don't know the future of their people. The people that had been welcomed to Egypt generations before by Joseph are now slaves and very harshly treated. And they don't know the end. God knows the end. They don't know the end. And so the question they're asking likely is, where is God? They're crying out to the God of their fathers, and where is he? And this is alluded to in Moses's questions to God. When he tells God he's got some hesitations, he said, "Who am I going to say sent me? What God is sending me? What God is finally speaking out after 400 years of this? Who am I going to tell you that you are? Where has God been? Where had God been during all of this?" God saw, and he remembered his promises, and he was poised for deliverance. He set out to bring them to a better land where they would not be oppressed, a better land where they would not be dealt harshly with, but where they would live under the blessings of Jehovah, where they would be a mighty people and a blessed people. God was there, listening to their cries, waiting for the appropriate time of deliverance. In 2 Kings 19, we see Elijah. Elijah, like Paul, was a man dedicated to serving God. He was a man that did great things to share God's will with those who otherwise would not want to listen to God's will. And even when Elijah spoke to them, they didn't want to listen. He prophesied in the time of Ahab and Jezebel, the worst of the worst in Israel. Right? These are rulers that oppressed the Israelites in their own country, set up idolatry, opposed Jehovah worship, and yet Elijah stood his ground as a prophet of God and a prophet to the people. And we see some exciting events in Elijah's life. In fact, the chapter before this, chapter 18, we see that he's on Mount Carmel, and he delivers this sign from God where the statue of Baal is ignored when the prophets are crying out to Baal, and yet God conquers and is victorious when he answers Elijah's prayer and sends this great sign of fire from heaven. And you look at chapter 18, you're like, Elijah's finally victorious. And the years before this, there were years of famine, were years of drought, were years of Ahab not listening, and it had worn on Elijah. And then we see this great victory, but the end of this victory is Jezebel calling for the head of Elijah. Kill him. We want him dead, and we are going to hunt him down. And it says that Elijah became afraid in verse 3 of chapter 19, and immediately ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba, that belonged to Judah, he left his servant there, but he went on a day's journey into the wilderness, and he sat under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die. He said, I have had enough. Jehovah, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. Suddenly an angel touched him, and the angel told him, get up and eat. Then he looked, and there was bread. He looked at his head, and there was a loaf of bread baked over hot stones and a jug of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord returned a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you. So he got up, ate and drank. Then on the strength from the food, he walked 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. He entered a cave and there spent the night. Then the word of the Lord came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he replied, I have been very zealous for the Lord of hosts, but the Israelites have abandoned your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are looking for me to take my life. Then the Lord said to him, go and return by the way you came. Oh, I skipped a verse. Sorry. Going back up to verse 11. Then he said to them, go out and stand on the mountain in the Lord's presence. At that moment, the Lord passed by. A great and mighty wind was tearing at the mountains and was shattering the cliffs before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a voice, a soft whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, and he went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came and said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? Again, he said, I have been very zealous for the Lord of hosts, he replied. But the Israelites have abandoned your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with a sword. I alone am left, and they are looking to take my life. And the Lord said to him, go and return by the way you came in the wilderness to Damascus. When you arrive there, anoint Hazael as king over Aram. You are to anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Manoah, as prophet in your place. Then Jehu will put to death everyone who escapes the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death everyone who escapes the sword of Jehu. But I will leave 7,000 in Israel, every knee that has not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. A fascinating note is that this takes place in the exact same place that God told Moses he was listening to the prayers of Israel. They're sitting on the mountain of the Lord, here called Horeb, there called Sinai. A place where God has answered prayers before. He looks at Elijah, who is at the end of his rope, who's begging for death, who tells God, I cannot go on anymore. Here he's in the same boat as Paul. He is beyond his own strength. He can't do it. He is overwhelmed. And God shows him a sign. He sees this wind. He sees this earthquake. He sees this fire. And it says, none of those terrible things, God wasn't there. But God was in the soft voice, a whisper after it all, the peace after the storm. And he gives Elijah a plan. He gives Elijah help. He gives Elijah encouragement. He tells him to go back, to continue what he was doing, to appoint people to help him. Hazael, Jehu, Elisha, that they would do God's will in dealing with the evil that Elijah had been facing. And lets him know that he's not alone, that 7,000 people were with him who had not bowed to Baal or kissed his feet. And that Elijah should lean on them. Where is God when Elijah is at the end of his rope? When he is tired? When he wants nothing more than death? When he, like Paul, despaired of life? God was in the soft voice. God provided help. God provided comfort and encouragement. He was there when Elijah needed him the most. And finally, looking at Psalms, 2 Psalms to look at, 10 and 13. Psalms 10 and 13. There's a common theme throughout the Psalms of where are you, God, and why aren't you listening, God? How long will it take you to answer me, God? Psalms 10 is a good one. That starts out, Lord, why do you stand so far away? Why do you hide in times of trouble? In arrogance, the wicked relentlessly pursue the afflicted. Let them be caught in the schemes they have devised. For the wicked one boasts about his own cravings. The one who is greedy curses and despises the Lord. In all his scheming, the wicked arrogantly thinks, there is no accountability since God does not exist. His ways are always secure. Your lofty judgments are beyond his sight. He scoffs at all his adversaries. He says to himself, I will never be moved. From generation to generation without calamity. Cursing, deceit, and violence fill his mouth. Trouble and malice are under his tongue. He waits in ambush near the villages. He kills the innocent in secret places. His eyes are on the lookout for the helpless. He lurks in secret like a lion in a thicket. He lurks in order to seize the afflicted. He seizes the afflicted and drags him in his net. So he is oppressed and beaten down. The helpless fall because of his strength. He says to himself, God has forgotten. He hides his face and will never see me. Rise up, Lord God. Lift up your hand. Do not forget the afflicted. Why has the wicked person despised God? He says to himself, you will not demand an account, but you yourself have seen trouble and grief, observing it, to take the matter into your own hands. The helpless entrusts himself to you. You are a helper to the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and evil person. Call his wickedness into account until nothing remains of it. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations will perish from his land. Lord, you have heard of the desire of the humble. You will seek the strength. You will strengthen their hearts. You will listen carefully, doing justice for the fatherless and the oppressed, so that the men of earth may terrify no more. And jumping down to Psalm 13, Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long will I store up anxious concerns within me, agony in my mind every day? How long will my enemy dominate me? Consider me and answer, Lord my God. Restore brightness to my eyes, otherwise I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have triumphed over him. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your faithful love. My heart will rejoice in your deliverance. I will sing to the Lord because he has treated me generously. Again, this is a common theme in the Psalms. This is something that is repeated quite a bit, called Psalms of Lament, where the beaten down, the tired, the struggling. Call out to God for mercy, for justice, for help. And you see at the end of these, most of these, with a few exceptions, they end with hope. They end with God answering the prayer. They end as Psalm 10 ended, that God sees trouble and grief. He observes it to take matters into his hands. That he is a helper of the fatherless, a judge of the wicked. That he is Lord, he is King forever and ever. That the nations will pass away, but he will not. And the Lord hears the humble. And he strengthens their heart. And he listens carefully. And he does justice to those who need it. And in 13, he says that he trusts in God. And he rejoices in his deliverance. And he sings to the Lord because of his generosity. Where is God? Is the question here. And the answer is, he is there to offer deliverance to those who are humble and to those who trust. That he is there to offer comfort and aid. And so where is God when we're tired? He is there to strengthen us. Where is God when we are scared and don't know the end of tragedy? He is there to deliver and to bring us to something better. Where is God when we need deliverance? He is there seeing and hearing our cries and getting ready to act. Where is God when we are at the end of our rope? He is there waiting to catch us if we trust in him, to let go of dealing with it with our own strength, to recognize, as Paul did, to recognize that we are at the end of our own strength and we need him, to trust him and only him. I don't know if anybody else needed to hear that other than me, but I think that's a universal feeling. I think there's a reason that that sentiment is so repeated in the Psalms, that we need help and we need to recognize our help. And I think it's a very American thing to not ask for help. It's very prominent in the culture around us to bootstrap and do it on your own and deal with it with your own strength. That's not the culture of God's people. The culture of God's people is to ask for help, to trust in God's deliverance, to understand that bad things happen. And I don't know what bad things have been happening to you lately. I know this year has been hard for a lot of people. I know I've been stressed, and I don't have it nearly as bad as some people do. A lot of people do. And yet we get tired, we get worn out, and we have to know that if we trust God, he is there at the end of the rope, waiting to catch us and carry us through. I hope that was helpful to you. And if there's anything that we can do to help you and encourage you, you can let us know, either on here or call somebody, or let us know how we can help you. If you don't mind, let's end in a prayer, and then I'll turn the recording off, and we'll go from there. Our Father in heaven, we thank you this morning for being a God of all comfort. We thank you for being a God of deliverance. We thank you for being a God of mercy and of justice. God, we thank you for carrying us through, because our strength is not enough. That we, like Paul, like Elijah, like David, like the Israelites, we have times where all we can do is cry out to you. cry out for your holiness and for your deliverance. God, help us to have that trust in you that we can let go of our own strength, that we cannot feel like we have to do it ourselves, but empower us to have a total dependence on you so that we can go through this life with strength and with joy and with love that is not our own, but is you shining through us so that we can share your glory with the world. Father, thank you for your son, Jesus. Thank you for the sacrifice that he has made for us so that we can be your children. Thank you for your spirit that cries out within us, Abba, Father, and hears the prayers that we don't know how to speak, but delivers them to you so that you can take care of us. Thank you for the strength you provide. Thank you for the love you provide. Help us to follow you. Help us to trust in you. In your son's name, amen.